I am Noah Vaughan. I'm superintendent, as you can read there, 1st Operations Group, part of the 1st Fighter Wing at Joint Base Langley, Eustis. We've got the F-22s here and some T-38s and the only F-22 demo team for the Air Force. So a lot of fun here. But none of that has anything to do with what we're talking about here. That's just a little bit about who I am. Let's go to the next slide, please. So Simon Sinek is he calls himself an eternal optimist. And I'm a big fan of his stuff. He's got some great TED Talks. He has some phenomenal books out there. And when I was doing some research into creating and writing my own leadership philosophy, I found this. And it's top of the page of my leadership philosophy. And he says, when we are a leader, we are not in charge, but we are responsible for taking care of those people who are in our charge. So that's something really important to know as senior NCOs is you are never in charge as far as, caveat the difference with what a commander has, the responsibility of command, the burden of command. Ultimately, there is an officer over you who is ultimately accountable. So they're the ones in charge. Now, there is some things they delegate to senior NCOs to be in charge, but ultimately they are in charge. So where we really are the bread and butter of senior NCOs is taking care of those people who are in our charge. And that's the crux of what we do. All the way leading up to that, we're technicians. There's definitely leadership baked in there. You wouldn't have made it to senior NCO. But once you get to senior NCO, straight out of Little Brown Book, that is where the transition happens to taking care of people. And that is our main priority. Next slide, please. And I didn't say it up front, but if anybody has any comments, please feel free to chime in, jump in the chat. If this was in a big classroom, I would definitely rely on participation. So ask questions, chime in. So first and foremost, know your people. That is what it's all about, is know them really well. And I'll tell you, I am not the best at remembering, people's first names, spouses' names, how old their kids are. I usually have to ask a couple times. I just asked Sergeant Glass about her kids. I know I've asked before, but maybe it'll stick this time. Probably not. But I think what's more important than knowing, the names and the details and the birthdays is know what's going on in their life. Know what's important to them. Help them figure out what their definition of success is, because everybody has a different definition. Some airmen that you supervise, their definition of success might be to reach the end of their 4 years without getting in trouble so they can go off and go to school or start a business. Somebody else that you supervise wants to be chief master in the Air Force. Somebody else, loves the Air Force, wants to participate and contribute, but family right now is where they need to concentrate most of their time. So we can't treat every airman the same. And you guys have probably seen the slide with the diversity and inclusion about equality isn't the same as equity. Equality is, 3 people, a tall person, a medium height person, a short person, all get a block to stand on. Equality is, the tall person doesn't need it, the medium person needs it, and the short person needs 2 blocks to stand on. So we need to make sure we're talking to airmen, we know what their concerns are, and care for them truly as if they were our own. Next, please. So as a senior NCO, as a new master sergeant, I really want you to concentrate on building those teams. You're probably already in an NCOIC type fashion. You might be moving into something like flight chief, depending on your career field and whatnot, is going to make that differ a lot. But building teams that, if people are bread and butter, people make up teams. So being able to know your people well enough to know how to capitalize on their strengths, how to help grow them where they have some weaknesses, and put the right people on projects together. I'll have a recommendation for a book here in a minute that really taught me a lot about building teams. So those removing seams, if you guys ever have deployed, they talk about the enemy exploiting the seams. And these are physical seams between areas of command. And I spent a lot of time in the Army, specifically in Afghanistan. And the enemy knows where the border of the Paktia province is and what Army unit patrols at. And they're going to literally exploit those physical seams between the areas of responsibility. So from my position as a group superintendent, I work on removing the seams between the squadrons that are under the group. I want them to overlap where it makes sense and maintain autonomous operations where that makes sense, but not letting things fall through those cracks. And then eliminating barriers. I've worked at everything from a squadron to a MAGCOM, and my mentality, especially the higher you get, like MAGCOMs, is I am here to remove barriers. I am here to take speed bumps out of your way. I don't want to be the speed bump. So I think you can take that even down to the, element in COIC, flight chief level, and have the mentality of working for your people, making processes better for them. Next slide, or next bullet. There's always going to be somebody that we need, leadership comes and says, we have the command chief coming by and he wants to recognize somebody. And if you have to go scrub all your people to find somebody, you could lose out on that. So as a flight chief, what I always tried to do is I always had, again, I knew my people, I knew what they wanted, and I tried to always have somebody on deck for whatever came up next that was a good thing. And, when that person got recognized, if it's the right fit recognition for them, then they would get it, and then it's on to the next person in the deck. But always have somebody like kind of in your hip pocket that you're ready to go. You can speak to them because you never know what opportunity is going to come up. Next. Set one standard and hold everyone to it. Worked for a squadron commander one time, Lieutenant Colonel Messerbrink. He's a full bird now. He might be retired now. But he had just such a great and simple leadership philosophy. And this was one of them. And it sounds so simple, but it's a lot harder than it sounds, is to truly set that one standard. Now, that's not, I don't want to be contradictory what I said earlier about know your people and you can't care for every airman the same. Caring for airmen differently and holding everybody to a single standard, they're different. In the PDG, I think it was General Creech said, selective enforcement of standards is one of the quickest way to destroy a unit. And you need to set, this goes all the way back to ACA's feedback, but you need to set realistic feedback. I have a ACA that I've tweaked for years, and when I get into a troop, that's the ACA I use. And if I have 5 troops, they all get the same ACA as far as my expectations for them. And I try to hold everybody to that same standard. Next slide, please. So Chief Dave Wade, he's the ACC command chief here. And I sat a panel with him a couple weeks ago, and he had this quote, and I loved it. I wrote it down. I keep a little list of running quotes in my phone just for things like this. And he talked about how your network is your net worth. And especially everywhere, but, take this base. There is a host base wing, the 633rd. There's 4 tenant wings, active duty and guard. There's a MAGCOM here. There are multiple group and below entities. And the Air Base Wing also runs the Fort Eustis, another 4-star command for the Army. So there's a lot of ways for messaging to get mixed and cultivating relationships is how we do it. So I made it a point here to specifically cultivate a relationship with the mission support group chief. And I did that before I needed anything from him. And that way, when something comes up and I need support for something for my people, let's say there's a short deployment notice that comes down, which does happen, then MSG is who I rely on to get through. The medical group with getting people through a processing line for medical. So that's just an example of building those relationships and maintaining them before you need them. Because if you've ever heard the term, you can't surge trust, when the crap hits the fan is not the time to build relationships. Those need to be in place before them. So a decent amount of my time since I became, honestly, a senior NCO, but especially as a chief, is building relationships and kind of, again, keeping those in your hip pocket for when you need them. And, the side benefit is you meet a lot of awesome people and learn a lot of things you didn't know otherwise. Next, please. Worked for a boss, and he had this phrase, protect your signature. And I'll tell you, I would get really frustrated at this guy because every memo you sent up, every piece of paperwork, every 1206, he would just bleed red all over it. And I got really frustrated. I remember going to him, I'm like, boss, there's a one space off here. It takes you more time to scribble red on it and send it back. And he's like, well, two things, Noah. He's like, one, if I do that, you don't learn. And two, he's like, I'm not going to send something up knowing that it's wrong because I am trying to protect my signature and the unit's political capital, their reputation, their integrity. So, and I see that when, certain squadrons or certain people, when they send up documents, you can tell they slapped them together and they just expect the next person in line to be the one to fix them. And when I'm talking to NCOs, senior NCOs, what I try to impart on them is the way I look at it is when I send up an EPR or a memo for the boss to sign or anything like that, I am putting my reputation at stake when I do that because you gain positive reputation, a memo at a time, and you can lose it very quickly with some half-assed stuff. So take the time, have some pride in what you send up. And my challenge is I challenge the people reviewing it after I send it up to find something wrong with it. I'm not talking happy to glad changes, oversaw versus orchestrated, managed versus led. I'm talking their name is spelled wrong. The social security is missing. The senior rater ID is not the right one. Those kind of things. That's where I think we need to have that attention to detail and just take some pride in it. Next. So this is a big thing they talk to chiefs about. And I have kind of a list of stuff for chiefs, but I pulled this one to the senior NCO because I think it's important to start building these good habits. As a master sergeant, you have a tremendous amount of influence, and airmen want to talk to you. Airmen want to know how to get to where you are. You're a little less intimidating than the old crusty chief who's been around forever. And when you're talking to that airman, just be in that conversation. Don't scan the room. Don't look for somebody else to talk to. Have that conversation until you need to do something else or until it kind of comes to a natural termination point and then move on. But remember, you are not the most important person in that conversation. The airman is. And I think if you go to the next slide, I think I heard a quote recently that I thought was perfect for this. And Barbara Jordan, you can look her up. She's a pretty amazing, she was an attorney and then an elected official in Texas. And this really struck me because she said it's more important to be interested than interesting. And, you've heard the term, people are going to forget what you did for them and what you say, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And if you think back to some leaders that you respect and you admire, there's probably somebody in there that if you really think back to when you first thought of them as a mentor leader, they probably listened to you. I can remember back to my first chief, Chief Kazmarek, and he took the time to listen to me and just ask me a few questions. Whether he forgot it 5 minutes later or not, I don't know. Probably not. We're still friends to this day. But be interested in what they have to say. Make them feel important, because they are. Next. So I had a situation, one assignment. It's a long story, but I'll sum it up to this: is that a couple of my staff sergeants, I was a master sergeant at the time. A couple of my staff sergeants got in touch with me and said that they had flown down to Mexico on a 2-day weekend without being on leave or letting anybody know, and that while they were down there, that the one of the airmen got arrested in the airport by the Mexican federales because she had bought a novelty lighter that looked like a grenade, and she forgot it was in her bag. So they were trying to shake them down for bribe money to get out of there. So, of course, you start making calls to supervisors and detachment commanders. Detachment commander calls squadron commander, who calls group commander, wing commander. Eventually the ACC 4-star was notified. Meanwhile, OSI is working with the State Department to try to figure out what's going on. And all this is going on in the background while I'm texting back and forth with this airman, because he said they didn't have voice service because where they were at, and they were on the airport Wi-Fi. This went on for about an hour, a little over an hour. I used to know the exact number. But it started off with the airman saying, "Hey, can me and the other staff sergeant take leave tomorrow?" And I was like, sure, if you don't have anything going on, all your stuff's caught up. And he's like, "Yeah, we're good." And then I'm like, what's going on? And he starts telling me the story. So an hour and something later, where, he's going through, keeps telling me what's going on, he finally texts and he said, "Ha ha, just kidding. Can we still get that day of leave?" And, it ended up being not a good situation for the two of them. They had to drive back from wherever they were. They really weren't in Mexico. They were in Florida, which was within bounds. But they had to drive back and report into detachment superintendent at 2:00 in the morning, then be at work about 6 in the morning to start writing all the reports about this. And what it boiled down to, they were obviously in the wrong. They did something they shouldn't have. It wasn't malicious. It was a bad attempt at humor. But what I took away from it, and the detachment commander spoke to me pretty frankly about this, is I got too close to them on a friend level, to where they thought it was okay to do something like that. And he was absolutely right. When the one individual got there, they were senior airman. I was a tech sergeant. He was actually my roommate for a little while. But, fast forward a couple of years, I'm a master sergeant. He's a staff sergeant. And I did not set enough professional boundaries. So that's an extreme example from my personal experience. You guys have probably seen some of these of your own. The one that gets highlighted the most is usually the unprofessional relationship between airmen and officers when they engage in a romantic type relationship. But, to keep yourself safe, this is not saying to be a jerk to them or to not be friendly. It's not saying you can't associate off duty together. My rule of thumb, since I learned a lot from that situation, is if I'm going to hang out with anyone junior from my rank, it's going to be an all or none situation. So either we're all going to go be invited to do something, or it's not going to be anyone. And if you do a one-on-one, I go to lunch with my superintendents once a month, but I go with each of them separately. But they all have that invitation to do a one-on-one. So just some advice from something I messed up. Next. there was a unit I worked in that I had a lot of pride in how they protected members' privacy. And there's always a lot of stuff going on in the background that even at the leadership level, you're not aware of. And we worked very hard to keep private matters private. And when I talk to airmen, a lot of FTAC airmen, one thing I encourage them is, so I got in a situation when I was an airman, my first duty station. I was arrested. The details are irrelevant. I didn't do it, but it was a rough few months while everything was working with ADC and getting everything squared away. But the thing that meant the most to me is everybody kept coming up to me, "Hey, we heard you're arrested. What's going on?" And I was like, "Hey, I can't talk about it. It's between me and my attorney." And one friend came up to me. She said, "Noah, I heard what's going on. What do you need? How can I help you? How are you doing?" And it was just, it made me cry because it was such a big difference from everybody else just asking what happened. And I knew nothing happened, but I couldn't say anything. And she just said, "What do you need? What can I do for you?" So I think it is human nature to want to dig into what happened. We all want to know. We see a senior airman standing in front of the commander's office in blues, and we knew they were a staff sergeant the week before. We want to know what happened. But I assure you, if it's something you need to know, your leadership will tell you. And if you don't need to know, be a good airman to them. Whether you like them or not, just be a good airman. And try not to spread any rumors, any discipline issues, all that stuff. That's very personal stuff. And anybody going through any kind of discipline issue is very difficult. So try to respect people's privacy. Next, please. I had somebody who took over for me in a unit that is a wonderful, amazing problems. And I came up with this line for them because this individual would frequently bring cans of gas to a problem, and they would just burn the place down while trying to get to the bottom of it. And my encouragement to them was, let's switch tactics and try bringing some buckets of water to a problem, not a can of gas. Maybe there's a time where a can of gas is what you need, stir those flames up. But how I operate is I want to calm things down. Most situations in leadership, bringing emotion into it does not help anything. It doesn't help the person you're fighting for. It doesn't help the situation. And when you bring emotion into the equation, that is what the other person will concentrate on. That you're losing your cool, that you're getting frustrated, and we prey on it. I mean, that's the way it works. So try to have that calming nature. Try to calm the situation when possible, not just dump fire on it. It is fun to dump fire on it sometimes, but shouldn't always do that. Next. Never think poorly about members to their peers or subordinates. I just had a situation last week where a former coworker of mine called me, and she had some concerns because a peer of hers was going around and talking about subordinates to other subordinates. And, I gave some of this same advice to her, take the emotion out of it, talk to the member. But the thing is if I go to another chief in this organization and I'm talking smack about a different chief, hey, we're getting started class. I'm saying it now.
Cool.
Number one, it's kind of doing that thing where, you're airing somebody's problems more than likely, or spreading rumors. And it discredits me as a leader. And all it does is tell the person I'm talking to that they can't trust me. So I love the scene from Private Ryan. If you guys have seen Saving Private Ryan, if you haven't, go watch it. But they're walking through the fields, and everybody's kind of grumbling about the mission, and they feel that they could be better served being back in the fight. And this one guy says, something about how he's a sniper, and he tells the captain, he's like, sir, I have these God-given talents that can be better utilized, XYZ. And the captain said to everybody, he's like, you hear this? Like, if you want to complain, this is how you do it. This guy was making a compelling argument. One of the other guys said, Captain, like, we never hear you complain. Like, why not? He's like, that's not the way it works. You gripe to me, I gripe to the major gripes to the colonel, so on and so forth. Always up, never down. And you guys are senior NCOs. People are going to be watching you. And if you are griping about other senior NCOs, or you're talking bad about airmen to other airmen, that is something you should not do. So just keep that in mind. Always up, never down. Lateral is fine if they are not a subordinate. There's times you're going to be a mass sergeant, you're going to have mass sergeants that work for you. They are not the ones to complain to. You complain to other master sergeants or up. Next, please. A big part of being a senior NCO is developing young officers. And that was something that I feel I was fairly prepared for, just because I grew up in an environment with a lot of junior officers, and we kind of came up through the ranks together. But there are career fields where this is a whole different matter, where it's a lot more difficult. And I can't tell you how to do it in yours, but I will tell you that these young officers are extremely, in general, they're very smart. They are eager to put all the leadership knowledge they have in their brains to use. And that's where you come in, is to help them lead effectively and translate the book learning to how to do it effectively. And you got to be careful about that. Like, I've got, as a group superintendent in an operations group, I've got fighter squadrons where there are squadrons with, a few dozen officers and junior officers and a very, very small handful of enlisted. But I don't go in there trying to teach the officers about force distribution and BTZ and strats and all that kind of stuff, because it's not what they need at this stage in the game. They're not supervising any enlisted. They're not rating them. And it's probably not the right time, because by the time they need it, specifically pilots, they normally don't supervise enlisted until they're a squadron commander. And by the time they become an 05, we're probably going to have changed enlisted evaluation system 4 times. But find the way that you can add value. Team building is always a good one. Next, please. I got this one from different one. Still good one though. You have permission to lead as a senior NCO. You are charged to lead. And I need you to use that. If you click that, please, Sunglass. So get out there and lead. Don't wait for additional permission. You have it. Look down, see that rocker sticking up. Go forth and lead. And Chief Lyda just retired at Davis-Monthan, and he had this quote, and I loved it. And he used it on the Chiefs all the time. He was like, everyone wants to be a lion until it's time to do lion shit. Go do lion shit. Like, don't just be a pretty lion laying in the grass, primping yourself, admiring that mass sergeant stripe. Like, go be a lion. Next. I learned this from Chief Hansen, one of my chiefs, when I was a master sergeant. He said, if you're a master sergeant, every airman and NCO in the squadron is your airman. I don't care what flight they're in, what their function is, or who they report to. They are your airmen. And flight chief, you're going to have your specific section that you're responsible for, but they're all your airmen, and they should all feel comfortable. They should know who you are and feel comfortable coming to you. That's not to say go get in another senior NCO's business and start directing their airmen. You need to be available to them, and you need to generally know who the airmen are. Next. So this is the big one for me, is own your screw-ups, accept responsibility when they happen. And when we talk about whether or not it's a one mistake Air Force or not, I don't think it is. It might be a one crime Air Force, and I'm okay with that to a big extent. But when I see people who've hit those stumbling blocks, when they've screwed up, The difference I see in how they recover is their attitude. Do they own what they did, accept it, and move on? Or do they wallow in it and alibi and say everybody's out to get them? I have seen people get demoted, and it wasn't for the action. It was how they handled themselves afterwards. And I've seen them just their career and their happiness just spiral down afterwards. I've seen other people get demoted, own it, and end up recovering, getting the stripe back, if not more than that. It's all in how you accept it and move on. And that's just something, I encourage you to own your screw-ups. I encourage you to share your screw-ups. I've got a whole professional development on all the ways I've screwed up for the last 20 years, or some of the ones that I'm willing to share anyways. It helps people realize that you're human and you got where you are with those screw-ups, maybe because of those screw-ups. Next, please. So you're mastered now. You got that rocker pointed up. You're easily identifiable. You've reached a pinnacle. And it's important to know that somebody is always watching you. Your airmen are watching you. Your peers are watching you. Your superiors are watching you. And, some of them might be watching to see if you screw up. Somebody might be watching to develop you. Somebody might be just watching to see what does it mean to be a master sergeant, and how should I emulate this person. So I can't tell you how they're watching you, but I can tell you they're watching you. And this is where integrity comes in. I'm not appreciative about integrity. You've all heard it for a long time, and it's all true, but it's doing the right thing even when nobody's looking. We'll assume somebody's always looking. Next. As I want you to continue to develop yourselves, and whether that is some reading, and I've got some books there that are recommendations that I love and have meant something to me at different points in my career, whether it's going to school and getting a degree, finishing an additional degree, or just doing something you're interested in. I don't necessarily care what direction you're bettering yourself, but I want you to develop yourself. And the reason I want you to, and Sergeant Glass and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, is when you're in that mindset of being in class and bettering yourself, it keeps you sharp. And when you stop doing that, you feel like, I don't feel right. Like something's wrong. And then you'll dive into something else that's probably challenging yourself and bettering yourself. So just being a continual cycle of developing yourself. And the biggest reason I like professional development and self-improvement is that it enhances your critical thinking. So specifically when you're taking college classes, you got to take all these different ideas and thoughts and researching 20 different places, and you got to combine it into a comprehensive and understandable report or document. And I need that from you. I need that from senior NCOs. I need them to be able to articulate to the senior leaders, to the officers with years and years and years of school and development. I need you to be able to talk on the same level as them and understand what they're talking about. So please continue to develop yourself. So I'll tell you, my number one book recommendation for new senior NCOs is Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette. It's kind of the snippet of it is he was a submarine captain. It's an 06, and he was supposed to be going to one of the best, newest, beautiful boats in the fleet. And at the last minute, they put him in one of the oldest, most poorly ran, worst morale, high separation rate submarines in the fleet. And he goes through the book talking about how he turned literally the ship around, turned the crew around. And it's a great read. And what I love in there is he gives a lot of attention to senior NCOs. And I don't recommend this book to airmen or NCOs, but I think for senior NCO, it's perfect because it gives you so much thought material. And it actually has, it's laid out almost like a textbook at the end of chapters. There's questions and takeaways. I think it is a worthwhile read for every senior NCO. So that is my most highly encouraged book for you to read. The next is The Ideal Team Player. talked about team building a little. And the ideal team player, if you've never read Patrick Lencioni, the way he writes his book is the first part of it is, I'll call it a parable. It's a story. And the second half examines the first half. So he tells a story, and then he goes through and brings in the leadership principles. And the ideal team player tells a story, and in the second half, they look at what does it mean in their organization? What is an ideal team player? What are we looking for? What do we want? What kind of person do we want to hire? And, they come up with a blend of hungry, humble, and smart, and they define what each one of those means. Now, in the military, you don't get much of a say on who's on your team. Like, I get who I get, and I have to make do with that. But where the application is to me is if I know somebody is 2 out of 3, hungry, humble, and smart, I can either pair them up with somebody who's strong in that third area, or I can try to build them up in that area, or maybe both. So that's where I took the real takeaway from that for me. The last one was Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. Again, I'm a big fan of his. But Leaders Eat Last, I read in a very interesting point in my life. I read it at a point that I worked for what I truly believe was only the only true toxic leader I've ever worked for. And I was having a lot of anxiety. I would come to work, and if that individual was there, my chest would be tight all day. If they weren't there, I could breathe a little easier. And in the book, it talks about a safe workplace environment and what that means. And it talks about the chemicals your body produces when you feel safe. It talks about the chemicals your body produces when you feel unsafe. And, when you talk about toxic leader, what I took away, it was my words, not him, but that toxic leader was causing my body to literally make and dump toxins into my bloodstream, which made me feel like I had a sandbag on my chest. So I recommend this one to NCOs, new NCOs, so they can recognize in the workplace, hopefully not in them, but if there's some toxic characters, like if they're truly creating that workplace where people feel safe in bringing ideas up. So those are my recommendations for you. Next. I'm a big believer in getting involved around base and in professional orgs. A couple reasons for this. One, I believe in leading from the front. And I can't tell my people they need to go to top 3 meeting if I don't go to it. So that's what I did right before I came here. I went to a top 3 meeting. Chiefs are part of the top 3, but a lot of times they don't go because they have the Chiefs group. But I believe in them. I believe in them because when you get involved in professional orgs, when you get involved around base, when you are leading peers or even superiors, and you're developing a whole different set of leadership muscles than what everybody else is. If you run a section of 10 people, they kind of have to do what you say. If it's not illegal, immoral, or unethical, they've got to do it. But when you're putting on the Air Force ball and you've got a bunch of NCOs and maybe some senior NCOs working, they don't have to do what you say, and they can just walk away. So it takes a different set of leadership muscles, and that's what I like about it. So please get involved and lead from the front. Next. This topic comes up all the time. I did a promotion board brief yesterday, and we probably spent 10 minutes on this. The bottom line up front is duty titles do not get you promoted. They are important, but they are only as important as what they mean in that career field. What you do in the duty title is more important. And I will share this. This is not to pat myself on the back because there's other people. Chief Josh Buck has the same story. I got promoted to chief with a duty title of flight chief of 43 people. I was the only senior master sergeant in my entire career field who was a flight chief. Everybody else was an operations superintendent at a squadron, or they were an actual superintendent of a small squadron. And here I am, flight chief. I didn't get a strap, wasn't even in the conversation, which is fine. You do not get promoted with a duty title. You get promoted for what you do within that duty title. And I would argue that if you are in a duty title that you do not feel is commiserate with your rank, if it is something on the lower end of desirable for your rank, let's not let a good crisis go to waste. If you're in something you feel is lower than what you should have, probably means you have some extra bandwidth. Probably means you can dedicate some more time to helping the people around you, maybe to the person who does have that duty title. So look for ways to turn it to your advantage. That's exactly what I did. I did not think I would make chief. I was positive of it. It was my first time up. I didn't have a strat, and I was a flight chief, and I got surprised. And I actually talked to somebody who was on the board later, and they were like, but look what you did while you were in that position. You were doing more than some of the people who were in like the premier E8 positions. So again, sorry if that comes across like pat myself on the back. That's not the intention. It's just to highlight duty titles. We make a lot more of them than what we should. Next, please. All right. General Lorenz, if any of you recognize him, he retired as the ATC commander. And I've been fortunate enough to have a couple interactions with him over my career. And one of the books on my shelf is Lorenz on Leadership. Phenomenal book. You can pick it up on Amazon. And it's based on just short papers that he wrote over his career about leadership. One of the things I love is his quote talking about basically solve your boss's problems. Like if you know what your boss's boss is struggling with, what their issues are, you're going to be able to craft what you do to help your boss out, which will then in turn help him with his boss. And the biggest thing, and he says it here, when you have to make that tough decision, you can make one that's in the best interest of your people and the mission of your unit, because you understand not only your echelon where you're sitting, but you understand a couple above that. So, take a hard think about that. What can you do to solve problems that one of your superiors is facing? And I'll tell you, their problems stem from their bosses. So a phrase I learned from an extremely smart major is, if my boss is interested in it, I find it absolutely fascinating. And that's regardless of whether they really find it fascinating or not. But we got to be interested in what our bosses have their mind on. Next, please. All right. This is the last slide with some tidbits on here. Advocate for all, sponsor few. There are times when I'm all ate up and I just want to go be the best chief or senior NCO I can, and I just want to take care of all the airmen. That is a wonderful thing we should have the intention to do, and you should advocate for all your airmen. But when I'm talking about sponsoring, I'm talking about taking somebody in your wing and really pushing them or helping them along. Maybe you see that spark in them and you can get them over the finish line. You cannot do that for every airman who stubs their toe. Not all of them deserve it. Some airmen just need to get out at the end of their term. We cannot keep every airman. That's not the way our system is built. I want to keep the right ones. And that's who I want you to be sponsoring. Sounds harsh. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm jaded. But you cannot drag every airman unwillingly to the finish line. I want you spending more of your time getting after your boss's problems and taking care of their airmen who actually give a crap about the Air Force and the mission. Next. You get what you tolerate. I had a boss told me, if you walk by a problem and don't address it, you have now condoned it. And now it's okay to do in that organization. And you're going to see it again. You know whose fault it is? Not the person's. It's your own damn fault. When you go into a unit and you see some shady practices, somebody at some point has tolerated that. And we have a lot of conversations here in the first fighter wing about getting out of the COVID hangover and all the standards that have gotten lax, and the hair and the beards and the boots and the uniforms and you name it. And we tolerated that to a certain extent during COVID. And we're over that now. And it's kind of a rough transition for some of the members who are trying to hang on to that. But just remember, you get what you tolerate. Next. So the best part about that new stripe sticking up that you guys probably look at 10 times a day, I know I did, it's pretty damn sexy. You should be proud of yourself. Absolutely. However, the best part of that is, you can use that to shield your people from stuff that they don't need falling on them. And if you're not willing to step up and step in to keep some stuff off their back, your focus might need to be revectored. This is not saying die on your sword for everybody. That's not what I'm talking about. But, I have senior NCOs. Hopefully I have a good enough relationship with them. They come to me frequently and say, hey, Chief, this is what you said for us to do from the group or the wing level, and this is the effect on our airmen. So they are putting themselves at potential risk, the wrath of the chief, to tell me that I've, done something that either I've screwed up or I've potentially done something that's going to impact their people adversely. That's what you need to use it for. That stripe gives you a voice in some conversations you probably didn't have before. And you do need to be judicious with it. Don't talk, just hear yourself talk. But you have a perspective. You're a senior NCO for a reason. You have a lot of experience that somebody else doesn't. So please use that to help your people. Now, if your people need sometimes we have to let stuff fall on people. That's just being honest. But a lot of times you can head that off. Next, please. So I'll tell you, I've saved the best for last as far as what I learned as a new senior NCO. My boss wanted to go in a certain direction, and I disagreed with him. And he said, "That's cute, Noah. We're going my way." Roger that, sir. Walked out. And essentially, when I went to my peers and subordinates, because I was acting as a superintendent at the time because they were deployed, when I went and told the boss's direction, I relayed it. And there might have been an eye roll in there, and it might have been, hey, you guys, this is what the boss wants, just do it. And while it might earn you a little bit of admiration in the short term because they know you're on board with them and it's stupid too, it destroys your credibility as a leader in the long term. And that is something I regret. And had I taken the time to get the commander to explain to me the why, I would have seen why they were doing it. And when I walked into the office, it would have been a different conversation. So when I walk out of a closed door session now, whether it was my idea, the commander's idea, a blend, or whether it's 180 degrees from what I wanted, my intent is for everybody I carry that message to, they're going to just think it was my idea the whole time. Not for me to take credit, but they're never going to know if I disagree with it or not. You have to carry out the commander's intents, especially when you don't agree with it. Because it's easy if you and the commander are in lockstep. You can rah-rah that shit all day. When you do not agree with it, and again, we're talking if it's not illegal, moral, and ethical. If it's just a different preference, you need to carry that out because that is the charge that you have as a senior NCO. And here's the deal. You are leadership, and that is a leadership decision. And if you click, please, this is, Colin Powell, another just phenomenal leader. And this rung true with me about this, where he said, disagree strongly, and I'll insert behind closed doors. But once you come out of there, you're going to execute faithfully. Next. And this is the last thing I have for you, fine batch of new senior NCOs. You are never alone, even when you feel like it, especially when you feel like it. You have peers. There's other senior NCOs. There are chiefs out there. There's people that want to listen to you and help you, even if you don't know it. So if you don't have those mentors, please find one, reach out to them, use them. I love to reach out to somebody who has no idea of the situation and no context, and just give them a, hey, my friend said, and run it by them. So use those. Like, that's the beauty of being a senior NCO, is being able to use those. Next slide, please. And that is all I have. Just under an hour, and I will open it up to questions if you want to come on the mic or type it in the chat.
So you were talking about, remember, the everybody wants to know, so they're, hey, what's going on? What happened to you? So that always makes me think about when on Facebook, when you see it, somebody on somebody's timeline where they have the line through and they're like, what happened? And that is so insensitive to me.
Right.
Instead of my condolences or anything like that. And what you said with that, it kind of resonated, because, the one thing that somebody doesn't want to put on Facebook is how somebody may have passed, so I think that that's a very valid point, to just be, empathetic and or sympathetic, and just be there for them and not be nosy, for lack of a better word. It's, but it did make me think that.
No, that's a great correlation to that. And we see it, the black line through the career field patch or something. And, I know when I see it in my career field, it's rough, and you want to know, is this a battle buddy? Is this somebody you know? But there's time and place for that. And at the time, you just need to, virtually put your arm around that person who's hurting and just be there for them. And, when it's time for you to know, you'll know. And it's a good point on that, sir.
I'm looking in the chat.
I don't see anything in there. I guess I just nailed it. Got to answer everybody's questions.
Hi, Chief.
Hey there. How you doing?
Hi, sir. Sorry, Barrios. So I am a personnelist. I'm at a ROTC detachment. And I know you talked about being involved in base activities and, the professional org groups. I am in a position where my closest base is down at Luke. I'm about an hour and a half away. So with the job and how far away I am, I won't really have that opportunity to be involved. Can you give any advice or recommendation on how I can still do that without being there?
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, thanks for what you do there. Again, like you're even before they're junior officers, you're getting on the ground floor in them. So thanks for that. And I'm sure they appreciate their time with you. Yeah, I actually do have some advice on that. My background, I'm a weather guy by trade, and I've spent a lot of time with the Army on Army bases. And when you're in the middle of 30,000 Joes, there's not a whole lot of Air Force professional development opportunities out there. I was in Savannah, Georgia, where, we had our deployment orders were cut through Shaw, our servicing MPF. At one point it was Robbins and other things we had to go down to Moody for. And our headquarters was at Fort Bragg, which was, so you're hours away from any Air Force-y type stuff. And I'll say what I did is I like being involved. I like staying engaged. So I had to find a way to do that. And what I did was I ended up becoming part of an American Legion and actually joining their executive council, was elected to be one of their exec council. And, I don't know, and I've reviewed thousands of EPRs. I don't know if I've ever seen another executive council on a veterans organization from an active duty member. So that's something you could do in your area. I'm sure there's a BFW or American Legion or a DAV or something. And it's definitely different. It's not top 3. It's not 5, 6 or whatever it is. But it's something where you're involved with military members, helping making their lives better. And I'll tell you, man, the older veterans that generally are in those places, they eat it up. They love it. So that would be one suggestion I have for you.